At my only daughter's wedding, a celebration I had paid for down to the last thread on every blossom, my future son-in-law, Mark, seated me at a small table in the corner of the kitchen, right next to the refuse bins. He didn't even meet my gaze. I simply smiled. No one else seemed to notice. And then, I canceled the orchestra, the open bar, and all the flowers. My life, for the past 2 decades, has been a carefully cultivated garden of quiet routines. Each morning, I rise with the sun, the first faint blush of dawn painting the East Fork Mountains a soft, ethereal pink. I make my Earl Grey tea, strong and dark, and settle onto the screen porch, watching the dew settle on my hydrangeas. The air, crisp and clean in early summer, carries the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. My small, impeccably maintained house, tucked away on a cul-de-sac in the quieter part of Asheville, is my sanctuary. Here, order reigns. Every book on my shelf is alphabetized, every cushion plumped, every silver spoon polished to a gleam. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about control. A fragile, comforting illusion of it, anyway. People, if they noticed me at all, would describe me as Evelyn Hayes, the elegant, rather reserved woman who kept to herself, often seen tending her roses or browsing the local bookstore. They wouldn't see the steel beneath the cashmere, the mind that processed every nuance, every fleeting expression, every unspoken word. They wouldn't see the decades of quiet sacrifices, the bitter lessons learned, the heart meticulously guarded after so much loss. My daughter, Sarah, was the singular exception to my carefully constructed solitude. My Sarah. My bright, optimistic, sometimes achingly naive Sarah. She was the one vibrant, unpredictable wildflower in my otherwise manicured landscape. I raised her alone, through lean years and lonely nights, after her father, my beloved David, was taken from us far too soon by a careless driver. Sarah was my everything, the reason I continued to breathe, to strive, to build this quiet life. She inherited David's easy laugh and my stubborn streak, a combination that made her both endearing and, at times, incredibly frustrating. She worked as a graphic designer, filling her small apartment in the city with vibrant colors and abstract art, a stark contrast to my muted, traditional home. She was kind, almost to a fault, always seeing the best in people, even when I, with my sharper, more jaded eyes, could spot the cracks in their facades. Then came Mark. He arrived like a perfectly composed symphony, a man seemingly without discord. Charming, handsome, with a polished smile that reached his eyes, or so it seemed to Sarah. They met at a gallery opening, a world away from my quiet garden, and within months, she was utterly, hopelessly smitten. My first encounter with Mark was at a Sunday brunch. He brought a bouquet of lilies, Sarah's favorite, and spoke with an easy confidence that seemed to captivate everyone in the room. Everyone, that is, except me. Call it a mother's instinct, or perhaps the refined cynicism of a woman who has seen too much of life's darker corners, but something about him felt manufactured. Too perfect. Like a beautifully rendered painting that, upon closer inspection, lacked a certain depth, a true soul. His compliments were a touch too effusive, his anecdotes a shade too rehearsed. He spoke of his family's prominent standing, their summer home in Nantucket, his burgeoning career in finance, all the markers of success that, to a woman like me, had come to mean very little. I noticed how his eyes, while sparkling with feigned warmth for Sarah, flickered dismissively at the server, how he subtly corrected Sarah's pronunciation of a French word, how he managed to subtly steer every conversation back to himself. I voiced my concerns, gently at first, to Sarah. He seems a bit performative, dear. Are you sure he's truly genuine? She waved away my worries with a dismissive hand, a rare flash of annoyance in her usually placid demeanor. Oh, Mother, you're always so skeptical. You don't know him like I do. He's wonderful. You just don't want me to be happy with anyone but you. The word stung, a familiar accusation that always felt like a dagger to my heart, despite its injustice. I withdrew, as I always did, refusing to engage in an argument that would only push her further away. My observations, my quiet misgivings, remained tucked away, simmering beneath the surface. 6 months later, Sarah called me, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. "Mother," he proposed. He got down on one knee in front of the Eiffel Tower, just like I always dreamed. She recounted the tale with breathless joy, oblivious to the faint chill that had settled in my own chest. "Mark," I thought, always thinking of the grand gesture, the perfect performance. Despite my lingering doubts, I offered my congratulations. Sarah was beaming, her future, as she saw it, stretching out before her like a golden path. When she casually mentioned that Mark's parents, while thrilled, felt it best for the happy couple to handle their own affairs, subtly implying they wouldn't be contributing financially, I didn't hesitate. "I'll pay for it, darling," I said, the words slipping out almost before I could fully process them. "Everything. Your wedding should be perfect, just as you deserve." It was my last great gift to her, my final act of unwavering devotion. I had saved meticulously for years, knowing that one day she would embark on her own journey. This was for Sarah, for her happiness, for the dream she so desperately clung to. Little did I know, it would also be the stage for a truth more bitter than anything I could have imagined. The wedding preparations began, a whirlwind of appointments, tastings, and endless decisions. For Sarah, it was a fairy tale unfolding. For me, it was a meticulous project, a testament to my love and my unwavering commitment to her happiness. I immersed myself in every detail, determined that this day, the culmination of Sarah's dreams, would be flawless. From the delicate lace of her gown to the exact shade of ivory for the tablecloths, no detail was too small for my scrutiny. I spent countless hours with event planners, florists, and caterers, often working late into the evenings after my usual quiet routines were done, meticulously balancing budgets and schedules. The financial investment was substantial, but the emotional cost, the energy I poured into it, felt even greater. It was an act of profound, silent devotion. Mark, on the other hand, was charmingly absent. He'd make fleeting appearances, offer a broad smile, a perfunctory, "whatever you think, dear," and then vanish, ostensibly for important business meetings or client dinners. His contributions were largely suggestions for increasingly extravagant additions, a champagne fountain, because Sarah deserves the best, a live ice sculpture to truly elevate the ambience, a custom-designed dance floor for a touch of unique elegance. Each idea, presented with a disarming grin, came with a price tag that steadily climbed, pushing the budget I had so carefully allocated. I began to notice the small, unsettling incidents. He would casually order an extra 100 roses for a centerpiece, mentioning to the florist, Evelyn said to spare no expense. He'd promise a deposit for a specialty lighting package, then conveniently forget, leaving me to cover it at the last minute to avoid cancellation fees. Once, I overheard him on the phone, subtly pressuring a vendor for a discount for a family friend, then pocketing the difference when I paid the full invoice. Each instance was minor, easily dismissed as an oversight or a miscommunication, but together, they formed a pattern. A subtle, insidious thread of dishonesty and entitlement. He wasn't just attached, he was actively, though subtly, exploiting the situation. "Mark, darling, the lighting package you selected is quite a bit over budget," I ventured one afternoon, holding a stack of invoices. We were in my living room, surrounded by swatches of silk and samples of calligraphy. Sarah was out running errands. He waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Mother Evelyn, it's just a wedding. A few extra dollars for perfection, isn't it? And Sarah absolutely adores the way those fairy lights sparkle. We wouldn't want to disappoint her, would we?" His smile was dazzling, disarming. It held an unspoken challenge. "Contradict me, and you'll be the one disappointing Sarah." I bit back my retort. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was the principle, the blatant disregard for my effort, my generosity. But I swallowed it down, as I always did, for Sarah's sake. These small aggressions began to manifest in arguments with my daughter. "Mother, why are you always questioning Mark?" Sarah would lament, her voice edged with frustration. "He's just trying to help. You're making things so difficult." "I'm merely trying to ensure everything is within our agreed-upon parameters, "Dear," I'd reply, my voice calm, belying the knot of frustration in my stomach. "These additional expenses are adding up quickly. It's my wedding, Mother. Can you just be happy for me?" Her eyes would well with tears, and the accusation, the familiar sting of "you don't want me to be happy," would resurface. It was a potent weapon, one I had no defense against. I would retreat, wounded, the gulf between us widening with each unresolved conflict. My quiet warnings, my subtle attempts to open her eyes, were met with an impenetrable wall of infatuation. She saw a devoted fiancé. I saw a calculating opportunist. One evening, I discovered a discrepancy that was harder to ignore. I was reviewing the catering contract, double-checking the final guest count and meal selections, when I noticed an itemized charge for a particularly expensive vintage champagne that I had explicitly vetoed due to cost. Below it, in a hand I recognized as Mark's, was a note, approved by Evelyn H. My name, scrawled as if it were my own. My heart clenched. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie, a deliberate act of deception. He was not just spending my money, he was doing it under false pretenses, using my name, my reputation. A cold dread began to settle over me. This wasn't just about a wedding budget anymore. This was about something darker, a pattern of behavior that hinted at a deeper moral rot. But how could I prove it to Sarah? How could I tear down her carefully constructed dream without shattering her trust in me completely? I held the invoice, the forged signature a stark testament to his duplicity, and a cold, resolute anger began to solidify in my heart. The perfect mirage he had presented was beginning to crack, and I, Evelyn Hayes, the quiet woman of routine, was about to step out of the shadows. The wedding day dawned with a deceptive, almost cruel perfection. The sky was a vast, cloudless blue, the air warm and sweet with the scent of late summer blooms. My house, usually a haven of tranquility, hummed with a nervous energy. Sarah, radiant in her silk robe, flitted between her bridesmaids, her laughter bubbling through the rooms like champagne. She looked utterly beautiful, her face flushed with excitement, her eyes sparkling with unadulterated joy. A part of me, the deeply maternal, fiercely protective part, swelled with love for her, wishing only for her unblemished happiness. Another part, the part that had seen too much, felt a growing sense of unease, a tightening knot in my stomach. I dressed meticulously, choosing a simple, elegant gown of dove gray, its lines clean and classic. My pearls, a gift from David on our 10th anniversary, lay cool against my skin. I wanted to exude quiet dignity, a silent bastion of support for my daughter. I touched up my lipstick, smoothed a stray strand of silver hair, and took a deep, steadying breath. Today was for Sarah. I would endure whatever Mark threw my way, for her sake. The ceremony was held at the Asheville Botanical Gardens, a place Sarah had always loved. It was idyllic, picturesque. Mark looked impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, his smile a blinding flash as Sarah walked down the aisle. My heart ached with a mixture of pride and a lingering, unspoken fear. They exchanged vows, their voices clear and strong, and a wave of applause rippled through the guests. I clapped along, a polite, almost imperceptible smile fixed on my lips. The reception was scheduled at the Grand Ballroom of the Grove Park Inn, an opulent, historic venue I had personally chosen and lavishly paid for. When we arrived, the valet whisked away my car, and I stepped into a scene of organized chaos. Dozens of guests milled about, finding their way to their tables, the air filled with a cacophony of greetings and laughter. My eyes scanned the room, searching for my designated place. I had assumed, naturally, I would be seated at the head table, or at least at a prominent table near Sarah and Mark. After all, I was the mother of the bride, the sole financial benefactor. But Mark was nowhere to be seen, bustling about with the caterers, his attention seemingly everywhere but on me. Sarah was being swept up by a flurry of well-wishers. I stood for a moment, a gray-clad figure adrift in a sea of celebratory colors, feeling utterly invisible. Finally, one of the event coordinators, a young woman with a harried expression, approached me. "Mrs. Hayes? Oh, there you are. Mr. Hayes Collins asked me to show you to your table. If you'll just follow me." Her tone was clipped, her eyes already scanning for her next task. She led me past the main ballroom, past the smaller dining rooms, down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and cooking grease. My brow furrowed. Where was she taking me? We turned a corner, and there it was, the kitchen. Not the elegant, open kitchen concept often seen in high-end venues, but the actual working kitchen, a bustling, utilitarian space filled with clanking pots, shouting chefs, and the humid aroma of roasting meat. In the farthest corner, tucked almost out of sight behind a stack of clean dishes and next to two industrial-sized refuse bins, was a tiny, round table. It was set for one. A single, wilted floral arrangement, clearly an afterthought, sat in its center. A folded napkin, a single place setting. My place setting. My breath hitched. The blood drained from my face, then surged back, hot and prickling. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. A public, utterly humiliating banishment. My future son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into our lives, the man whose wedding I had financed entirely, had relegated me, the mother of the bride, to the kitchen, next to the garbage. The event coordinator gestured curtly. Here you are. Your server will be with you shortly. She spun on her heel, disappearing back into the main hall, leaving me standing there, utterly alone. 1,000 emotions warred within me: shock, a searing, incandescent rage, the sharp sting of betrayal, the deep, aching pain of public humiliation. My hands trembled, my vision blurred for a moment. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, threatening to betray the carefully constructed calm I always maintained. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, a cold clarity descended. I had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of composure, of appearing unruffled even when my world was crumbling. This moment, this egregious insult, would not break me. Not here. Not now. I walked to the small table, pulled out the chair, and sat down. My posture was ramrod straight, my chin held high. I unfolded the napkin and placed it on my lap. I looked around the bustling kitchen, at the cooks sweating over their stations, at the servers rushing past with trays of food. A server, a young man with kind eyes, hurried over. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" "A glass of ice water, please," I replied, my voice steady, betraying no hint of the storm raging inside me. I even managed a faint, polite smile. It was a mask, a perfect, impenetrable facade. No one in that kitchen, not even the server, would guess the depth of the insult, the magnitude of the silent war that had just been declared. From my solitary vantage point, I could faintly hear the music drifting in from the ballroom, the muffled sounds of laughter and celebration. I imagined Sarah, dancing, glowing, oblivious to her mother's exile. And then, as if to twist the knife, Mark's voice, amplified by the sound system, boomed through the hall as he began his toast. He spoke of Sarah, of their love, of his own wonderful family. He waxed lyrical about the incredible support they had received, about the magnificent celebration. My name, however, was conspicuously absent. Not a single mention. Not a word of thanks. Nothing. That was it. The final, damning blow. The carefully constructed dam within me finally broke, not with a crash, but with a quiet, terrifying resolve. This wasn't just about disrespect. This was about utter contempt. He had not only insulted me, he had erased me. And I, Evelyn Hayes, would not be erased. My phone, a sleek smartphone I kept in my clutch, felt heavy in my hand. I slipped it out, my movements slow, deliberate, unseen by anyone in the chaotic kitchen. My fingers, steady as a surgeon's, navigated to my contacts. I scrolled to Philip, events coordinator. Then, Mr. Henderson, band manager. And finally, Floral Elegance, Ms. Albright. I began to dial. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, regretful, almost apologetic. "Philip, I'm so terribly sorry to do this at such short notice, but there's been an unforeseen complication. I need to cancel the open bar, effective immediately." "Yes, I understand. Just do it." Click. Next call. "Mr. Henderson? Evelyn Hayes here. Regarding the band. I'm afraid we'll have to terminate the contract." "Yes, I'm fully aware of the terms. You'll be compensated for your time, of course." But the performance is off. Click. And finally, Ms. Albright? Evelyn Hayes. The floral arrangements. I'm afraid we won't be needing them after all. Consider them cancelled. Click. 3 calls. 3 quiet, devastating acts. I returned my phone to my clutch, folded my hands neatly on the small, isolated table, and watched the kitchen staff hurry past. My smile, the same faint, polite smile, remained fixed. But beneath it, a new Evelyn had been born. The quiet woman of routine was gone. In her place was a force of nature, patient, precise, and utterly, irrevocably determined. This was not just about revenge. This was about justice. And Mark Hayes Collins had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The first ripple of chaos began subtly, a slight hesitation in the music, a brief, awkward silence. Then, a murmuring started, a collective confusion spreading through the opulent ballroom. I, perched in my solitary kitchen corner, could only hear the distant echo of it, but I could almost taste the rising unease. The string quartet, which had been playing a lovely rendition of a classical piece, simply stopped. Abruptly. The absence of sound was more jarring than any noise. A few minutes later, the first signs of real disarray appeared. Servers, looking flustered, began to huddle near the kitchen entrance, whispering urgently. The gentle clink of champagne glasses ceased. Instead, I heard the frustrated shouts of the head waiter, then the frantic ringing of a phone. Through the swinging kitchen doors, I caught glimpses of guests looking around, perplexed, some already heading towards the bar, only to find it deserted. Then came the crescendo. The doors to the kitchen burst open, and Mark stormed in, his face a mask of furious disbelief, his usually impeccable hair slightly disheveled. He was shouting, his voice echoing off the stainless steel surfaces. What in God's name is going on out there? Where's the music? Where's the bar? Why are the florists packing up the centerpieces? A harried event manager, pale and trembling, approached him. Mr. Hayes Collins, sir, I don't know what to say. We've just received calls. From the band manager, the bar service, and Floral Elegance. They all said their services were cancelled. Mark's eyes widened, a vein throbbing in his temple. Cancelled? By whom? This is outrageous. I'll sue everyone. His gaze swept across the kitchen, wild and accusing, before landing for a brief, incredulous moment on me. I met his eyes calmly, my faint smile unwavering. He faltered, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face, but quickly dismissed it. How could this quiet, unassuming woman, exiled to the kitchen, be responsible for such a catastrophe? It was unthinkable. He barked orders, made frantic phone calls, his earlier composure utterly shattered. His charm had evaporated, replaced by a raw, unattractive panic. I watched him, detached, almost clinical. The illusion he had so carefully maintained was crumbling, and the sight was profoundly satisfying. The chaos escalated. Guests began to leave, mumbling their apologies, some clearly amused by the unfolding disaster. The grand, lavish wedding I had paid for was rapidly devolving into a bizarre, flowerless, musicless, and, most damningly, drinkless debacle. Finally, Sarah appeared at the kitchen entrance, her wedding dress dragging slightly, her face tear-streaked and horrified. Her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with confusion and anger. She saw Mark frantic and red-faced. She saw the empty bar. She saw the dismantled flower arrangements being carried out the back door. And then, her gaze fell upon me, sitting serenely at my small table by the bins. Mother. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Mark, overhearing her, spun around, his eyes blazing. Evelyn, do you know anything about this? What the hell is going on? I slowly rose, my movements graceful and deliberate. I smoothed my dress. Good evening, Mark. Sarah, darling. My voice was calm, almost melodious, a stark contrast to the pandemonium around us. Yes, I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding. A rather unfortunate technical glitch, one might say. Mark scoffed, his face twisting with contempt. A glitch? This entire wedding is a disaster. The band is gone, the bar is empty, the flowers are leaving. And you're sitting here, calmly drinking water? What did you do? Me? I tilted my head slightly, feigning innocence. Oh, Mark, don't be absurd. As you so thoughtfully arranged, I've been enjoying my solitary meal here in the, shall we say, exclusive dining area, far from the main festivities. How could I possibly have orchestrated such a widespread cancellation from a table next to the refuse bins? I allowed my gaze to briefly flick towards the bins, a subtle, pointed reminder of his earlier insult. His face flushed a deeper red. He knew. He saw the cold, unyielding resolve in my eyes. He remembered my quiet smile. You bitch. You actually did this. Why? Sarah gasped, taking a step back. Mother. What is he talking about? You couldn't have. Her voice cracked, disbelief battling with a dawning, terrible suspicion. Darling, I said, turning my gaze to my daughter, my voice softening just a fraction. Sometimes, when one is seated in a less than ideal location, one gains a certain perspective. One sees things more clearly. And sometimes, one realizes that the cost of perfection, especially for a mirage, is simply too high. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, laden with double meaning. There were some discrepancies, shall we say, in the billing. Some unexpected additions, made without my explicit approval. I simply rectified the situation. Discrepancies? Mark roared, stepping menacingly towards me. You canceled my wedding. Our wedding. Because of some petty bills? Not your wedding, Mark, I corrected him, my voice still unnervingly steady. Sarah's wedding, which I paid for in its entirety. And the cancellations, unfortunate as they are, were a direct consequence of a sudden, rather shocking revelation about the true nature of certain arrangements. I looked pointedly at him, letting him know I wasn't just talking about money anymore. Sarah, however, wasn't connecting the dots. Her face was a picture of devastation. Mother, how could you? How could you ruin my wedding? On my special day? The betrayal in her voice was a physical blow, sharper than any of Mark's insults. Sarah, I began, reaching out a hand, but she recoiled. No, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe this. You always hated Mark. You did this out of spite. She turned and ran, her white dress a blur, disappearing back into the now half-empty ballroom. Mark glared at me, his eyes filled with venomous hatred. You're going to regret this, old woman. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I have a very clear idea, Mark, I replied, my smile tightening, a cold, predatory glint entering my eyes. Perhaps clearer than you realize. And, unlike you, I always pay my debts. Both financial and otherwise. He scoffed, but a flicker of genuine fear crossed his face. He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, presumably to try and salvage what little was left of his grand performance. I watched him go, then slowly returned to my seat. The kitchen staff, who had frozen during the confrontation, cautiously resumed their work, casting nervous glances my way. I sipped my water, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The wedding was ruined. Sarah was heartbroken. But the quiet storm had begun. And this was only the very first drop of rain. The days following the wedding disaster were a blur of cold silence and simmering tension. Sarah wouldn't speak to me. Her phone calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts, when she sent any, were brief, scathing accusations of sabotage and malice. You ruined everything, Mother, one read, an icy shard piercing my heart. I don't even know who you are anymore. Each word was a fresh wound, a reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. Yet, amidst the pain, a steelier resolve took root. This, I told myself, was the cost of truth. And the truth, no matter how bitter, would eventually set her free. Mark, predictably, did not remain silent. He embarked on a vicious smear campaign, subtly at first, then more overtly. Friends, distant relatives, even some of my bridge club acquaintances, began to eye me with a mixture of pity and polite disapproval. Such a shame about the wedding, Evelyn, they'd say, their voices dripping with feigned sympathy, their eyes betraying the gossip they'd undoubtedly consumed. Mark seemed like such a lovely boy. He painted me as a bitter, jealous old woman, intent on destroying her daughter's happiness. He was a master of manipulation, twisting the narrative to his advantage. But their whispers, their judgment, only solidified my purpose. They didn't know the real Mark. And soon they would. My quiet home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a command center. The methodical nature that once organized my spice rack and rose garden was now turned with relentless precision to unraveling Mark Hayes Collins. My methods were subtle, almost invisible. I didn't storm into police stations or hire flashy private investigators. Instead, I leaned on old acquaintances, dormant connections from a life I thought I had long since put behind me. There was Arthur, a retired detective from the county sheriff's department. He and David had been fishing buddies, and Arthur had always held a quiet respect for my ability to observe and deduce. I called him, ostensibly for a casual chat over coffee, a rarity for me. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town. "Arthur," I began, after the pleasantries and updates on our respective lives, "I find myself in a rather delicate situation. My daughter's fiancé. There are things about him that trouble me. Things that don't quite add up." I spoke in careful generalities, sketching a portrait of a man too good to be true, a man with financial inconsistencies. Arthur, with his gruff exterior and keen mind, listened patiently, sipping his black coffee. He grunted, a familiar glint in his eye. "Sounds like he might have a ghost or two in his closet, Evelyn. What's his full name again? And date of birth?" He made a quick note on a napkin. "No promises, mind you. But I can make a few discreet inquiries." He understood the unstated request, the need for quiet, untraceable information. While Arthur worked his magic, I delved into my own form of investigation. I used the internet, a tool I usually reserved for ordering rare seeds and researching historical novels. Mark had a surprisingly robust online presence for someone who claimed to value privacy. LinkedIn profiles, charity gala photos, even a few old, carefully curated articles from local society pages detailing his family's philanthropic endeavors. The surface was pristine. Too pristine. It was like a perfectly painted wall hiding cracks beneath. I started with his financial claims. A quick search of public records revealed a recent property transaction where Mark was listed as a minor partner in a development firm. The figures seemed inflated, the investors surprisingly obscure. It was a thread, thin but tangible. I remembered the lavish spending, the casual lies about business expenses I'd overheard. My suspicions hardened. As I meticulously pieced together the fragments of Mark's public life, my own past, the one I had so carefully compartmentalized, began to resurface. The quiet life in Asheville was a fortress, built brick by painful brick after David died. He was the anchor, the laughter, the vibrant color in my world. His sudden death had ripped a hole in my universe, leaving me adrift, a young widow with a baby daughter and a mountain of medical bills that insurance didn't quite cover. I remembered the desperate scramble to make ends meet, the indignities of accepting charity, the cruel judgment of those who assumed I couldn't cope. I had learned, then, the harsh realities of a world that didn't care for vulnerability, a world where appearances often trumped truth. I had learned to be strong, to be self-reliant, to build walls. And I had learned to spot the wolves in sheep's clothing, men like Mark, who preyed on innocence and trust. David had warned me, once, in jest, about my uncanny ability to see straight through people's nonsense. It wasn't a jest anymore. It was a honed survival instinct. My fierce, protective love for Sarah was born from that struggle, from my absolute determination that she would never face the same hardships, the same betrayals I had endured. I had given her everything, shielded her from the ugliness of the world, perhaps too well. I had wanted her to believe in fairy tales, to be naive, to be happy. But now, that very naivety had blinded her to Mark's true nature, just as I had been blinded by a man once, long ago, before David. A man who had swept me off my feet with promises and charm, only to leave me with debt and a broken heart. A quiet shame I rarely revisited. Arthur called me a few days later, his voice low, tinged with a professional caution. "Evelyn, your gut instinct is usually right. Our friend Mark, he's got a few things simmering. Nothing outright criminal yet on paper, but a pattern of, let's call it, creative accounting. And a couple of disgruntled former business partners who wouldn't mind seeing him get his comeuppance. He then dropped a bombshell. There's also a record of a previous marriage. A quickie divorce, very quiet, about 5 years ago. Ex-wife's name is Eleanor Vance. Lives in Phoenix now. Eleanor Vance. The name hung in the air, a new thread, a promising, potentially explosive lead. A previous marriage kept hidden from Sarah. A man who erased his past. That detail alone was damning. My heart hammered with a grim satisfaction. The cracks in Mark's perfect facade were widening. And I, Evelyn Hayes, was ready to peel back the wallpaper. The discovery of Eleanor Vance, Mark's conveniently forgotten ex-wife, was a jolt, a cold splash of reality in my quiet investigation. It confirmed everything I suspected. Mark was a man who crafted his own narrative, conveniently omitting any inconvenient truths. Armed with Eleanor's name and location, I felt a surge of grim determination. This wasn't just about financial impropriety, it was about a fundamental deceit, a willingness to build a life on lies. Mark, meanwhile, had grown bolder. The subtle slights morphed into overt threats. My phone would ring at odd hours, the caller ID blocked. A distorted voice, unmistakably his, would whisper, "Still enjoying your quiet little life, Evelyn? Don't think for a second I've forgotten what you did. You push me, and you'll find out just how loud I can get." He started driving past my house, slowly, his dark SUV a menacing shadow on my peaceful street. I saw him once, parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, staring at my windows. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but it also hardened my resolve. He was trying to intimidate me. It wouldn't work. I had faced greater fears than a desperate, cornered man. Then came the direct hit to Sarah. I received an anonymous email, filled with vicious, fabricated stories about my past, old, long-buried rumors about financial impropriety from David's business, exaggerated tales of my supposed, controlling nature. The email was clearly designed to discredit me, to reinforce Mark's narrative of the jealous, unstable mother. It was a crude attempt, but cunning. It struck me not because I feared exposure, but because I knew it would reach Sarah. And it did. Sarah called, her voice tight with a fresh wave of anger. "Mother, what is this? These horrible things people are saying about you. Is any of it true? Darling, these are desperate lies, fabricated by someone who wants to hurt us both." I tried to explain, my voice gentle. "Please don't listen to them." "But why? Why now?" she wailed. "It's all because of what you did at the wedding. You unleashed this." "No, Sarah. This was unleashed long before the wedding. I merely exposed it," I countered, my patience wearing thin. "Mark is not who you think he is. He is trying to manipulate you, to turn you against me so he can continue his charade." But she hung up, the line dead, leaving me with a familiar ache of helplessness. This was my moral dilemma, the sharpest thorn in my side. Could I truly protect Sarah by exposing Mark, knowing that the truth would wound her so deeply? Was I saving her from a poisonous marriage or merely inflicting a different kind of pain? The image of her tear-streaked face at the wedding, her accusation of ruining everything, haunted my quiet nights. But then I remembered Mark's cold eyes, his calculating smile, the casual cruelty of placing me by the bins. And the deeper, darker currents Arthur had hinted at. The fear for Sarah, a primal, motherly fear, always won out. Better a painful truth now than a lifetime of corrosive lies. Arthur called again a week later, his tone more urgent. "Evelyn, there's more. Mark isn't just playing with money. He's been involved with a shell corporation, a front for some serious investment fraud. We're talking millions, not thousands. And the people he's associated with, they're not the kind you want to cross. Local syndicate, small time, but nasty. They don't take kindly to loose ends, or to their schemes being exposed." My heart pounded. This was far beyond what I had initially imagined. My son-in-law wasn't just a cad or a con artist. He was tangled in a web of genuine criminality, potentially dangerous people. This elevated the stakes to a terrifying level. I was no longer merely protecting Sarah from a broken heart. I was protecting her from a genuinely dangerous man and the dangerous world he inhabited. But amidst the escalating threats and dire revelations, a fragile seed of doubt was finally sprouting in Sarah's mind. She hadn't called me back, but she had stopped defending Mark in her cryptic texts. One evening, she messaged me, "He's been so distant, mother. And he keeps talking about moving on from this unfortunate incident. He doesn't even seem to care how upset I am." Another text followed a day later. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a much more expensive ring than the one he gave me. And the date. It was before he even proposed. A small, almost imperceptible crack in her armor of infatuation. She was starting to see. Not the whole picture, not yet, but enough to question. Enough to realize the illusion was fraying. It was a glimmer of hope, a sign that my painful gamble might not be in vain. My quiet, relentless pursuit of truth, though it had alienated my daughter, was beginning to yield results. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had to see it through. For Sarah. For the woman she deserved to be, free from the shadow of a man like Mark. The revelation of Mark's involvement with organized crime was a cold plunge into an unfamiliar, perilous world. My comfortable routines, my perfectly ordered life, suddenly felt like a thin veil stretched over a churning abyss. The threats from Mark intensified, becoming less veiled. My mailbox, usually filled with gardening catalogs and polite correspondence, started receiving anonymous, menacing notes. Some secrets are best left buried, old woman, one read, crudely cut letters from magazines forming the words. Another was a photo of Sarah, taken discreetly, casually tossed onto my porch. A stark, terrifying message, I can hurt her. The moral dilemma was a constant, searing ache. I imagined Sarah's face, her heart shattered, her faith in love perhaps irrevocably damaged. Was I truly protecting her, or was I merely dragging her through the mud of my own making? The thought of her suffering, a direct consequence of my actions, was almost unbearable. But then I pictured her married to Mark, entangled in his criminal schemes, living a life built on deceit and danger. The image of her, forever bound to his darkness, was more terrifying than any immediate pain. I had to choose the bitter pill now, for the chance of a healthier future. My investigation became more aggressive, more direct. I understood the risks, but the stakes were too high to retreat. Arthur, my retired detective friend, had provided me with a few names, individuals who had been burned by Mark's financial schemes, people who had every reason to see him fall. The first was a man named Robert Maxwell, a small business owner in Charlotte, North Carolina, who had invested his life savings into one of Mark's surefire opportunities, only to lose everything. I drove to Charlotte, a 4-hour journey that felt like a lifetime. Maxwell was a man hollowed out by betrayal, his eyes vacant, his office a testament to his financial ruin. He was hesitant, fearful. "He threatened me, ma'am," Maxwell rasped, his voice trembling as he clutched a worn photo of his family. "Said he'd make sure I lost everything, including my reputation. These people he works with, they're not just empty threats." But as I spoke, quietly, patiently, sharing my own fears for Sarah, a flicker of defiance sparked in his eyes. "He used my company's accounts," Maxwell finally admitted, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "To launder money. He put things through, small transactions at first, then larger. I have the records. I just never dared to go to the police." He handed me a thumb drive, his hand shaking. "This is everything. My records, emails, bank statements. It implicates him. And it implicates me too." My heart sank at his words, but I knew this was the kind of evidence I needed. Solid, undeniable, and dangerous. The next contact was a woman, Eleanor Vance, Mark's ex-wife. I found her in Phoenix, Arizona, working as a real estate agent, her profile meticulously scrubbed of any mention of her past marriage. It took several attempts and a carefully worded letter to convince her to meet me. She was wary, her face etched with a quiet bitterness. "He ruined me, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, as we sat in a sterile coffee shop. "Took everything. My savings, my credit, even my self-respect. He promised me the world, just like I bet he promised your daughter." Then he left me with a mountain of debt and a trail of his own financial fraud he'd cleverly woven through my accounts. I was nearly indicted. Her words were a chilling echo of my own early life, the quiet shame of being used, of being left vulnerable. She confirmed Mark's methods, his charming manipulation, his utter ruthlessness. She had a signed prenuptial agreement, which Mark had made her believe was ironclad, but which, on closer inspection, had a small, crucial loophole she had never noticed, a loophole that would have protected her if she had known where to look. More importantly, she had a collection of text messages and recorded phone calls, hidden away, detailing Mark's escalating demands and veiled threats against her if she ever spoke out. "He told me he'd make sure I was homeless," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He told me no one would ever believe me." Back in Asheville, the pressure intensified. Mark, sensing my growing momentum, decided to hit me where it hurt most. He didn't just spread rumors anymore. He meticulously constructed a situation to discredit me. My bank account, the one I had used to pay for the wedding, suddenly showed a series of suspicious, large transfers to offshore accounts I had no knowledge of. A carefully planted trail of false evidence, designed to implicate me in the very financial crimes Mark was committing. He was trying to frame me, to turn me into the criminal, while he walked away clean. A detective, a young, ambitious woman, came to my door, polite but firm, asking pointed questions about my financial dealings. My quiet, orderly world was being systematically dismantled. I felt a surge of panic, but then the cold clarity returned. This was his last, desperate play. He was playing with fire, and I, Evelyn Hayes, knew how to burn. That evening, a text from Sarah. "Mother, he just told me he's leaving town for a while. Said he has to sort things out because of your meddling. He didn't even say goodbye. He just left." The text was a revelation, a confirmation that my daughter was finally seeing him for who he was. The pain in her words was palpable, but so was a glimmer of raw, untempered realization. It was the hardest thing she had ever sent me, and the most hopeful. My moral struggle, the agonizing choice between her immediate happiness and her ultimate safety, had reached its peak. She was hurt, but she was no longer blind. I looked at the thumb drive from Maxwell, at the carefully stored messages from Eleanor. The decisive evidence was there, undeniable. It implicated Mark, yes, but it also painted a picture of a vast, dangerous network. Bringing him down would expose me, expose Sarah to the fallout, and possibly even put us in danger. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I considered the enormity of what I was about to do. But I remembered Mark's arrogant smirk, his casual cruelty, his threat against Sarah. And then I remembered David's face, his kind, honest eyes. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and dialed Arthur's number. It was time to stop playing with fire and start extinguishing the flame. The air in Arthur's small, cluttered office was thick with the scent of stale coffee and old paper. Maps of the county were pinned to a corkboard, half obscured by yellowing newspaper clippings. He sat across from me, his expression grave as he reviewed the evidence I'd laid out, the thumb drive from Maxwell, the text messages and recordings from Eleanor, the meticulously compiled details of Mark's financial shell corporations, and even the anonymous threats I'd received. "This is big, Evelyn," Arthur said, tapping a finger on a printout of a bank statement showing a multi-million-dollar transfer. "Much bigger than a ruined wedding. This is organized fraud, money laundering. These people, they don't play by the rules. Mark's neck is on the line, and by extension, so is anyone connected to him." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary concern. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once this goes public, there's no turning back. It'll be messy. It'll hurt Sarah." "I know," I replied, my voice firm, devoid of any tremor. "It already hurts her. But living a lie, Arthur, would hurt her far more in the long run. He threatened her. He tried to frame me. He needs to be stopped, not just for Sarah, but for all the Maxwells and Eleanors he's destroyed." My resolve was a cold, hard stone in my gut. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about dismantling a destructive force. We decided on a strategy. Given the scope of Mark's activities, We needed more than just a local detective. Arthur would contact his former colleagues in the FBI's white-collar crime division. The evidence was compelling enough to warrant immediate attention. However, before the official hammer fell, I wanted one more conversation, one final, unvarnished truth-telling with Mark, and most importantly, with Sarah. I knew it wouldn't be easy. It would be an act of emotional surgery, painful but necessary. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a small, quiet conference room at Arthur's old agency after hours. I sent a simple text to Sarah. "Darling, there are things you need to know. Things about Mark. Please meet me. Just you." To Mark, I sent an equally cryptic message. "We need to discuss your future. I have information that will be very revealing. Come alone." The air in the sterile conference room crackled with unspoken tension when they arrived. Sarah walked in first, her face pale and drawn, her eyes swollen. She looked fragile, her wedding day glow utterly extinguished. Mark followed, his usual charming smirk replaced by a guarded, almost wary expression. He looked at me, then at the empty chairs, his eyes narrowing. He knew this wasn't a casual meeting. "What is this, Evelyn?" Mark demanded, his voice edged with a forced bravado. "Some kind of ambush?" "No ambush, Mark," I said, my voice calm, as if discussing the weather. "Just a conversation. A very important one. Please sit." Sarah sat hesitantly, avoiding my gaze, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mark remained standing, his posture aggressive, his eyes darting between me and the door. "I don't have time for your games, old woman. If you think you can still cause trouble, you're mistaken. I've already set things in motion to ensure you're quite busy." He gave a dismissive wave, clearly referring to the frame-up he'd attempted. "Oh, I'm quite aware of your emotions, Mark," I replied, a cold edge entering my voice. "And I assure you, they will prove to be entirely ineffectual. In fact, they merely add to the mountain of evidence against you." I then laid out the evidence, not physically, not yet, but verbally. "Mark," I began, my gaze piercing his, "do you remember Eleanor Vance? Your first wife? The one you conveniently erased from your history? The one you left with a mountain of debt and the threat of legal action against her for your own fraudulent dealings." His face, which had been wary, now went utterly slack. The color drained from it. He took an involuntary step back. Sarah gasped, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with shock. "First wife? What are you talking about, Mother?" "He also, dear, has a history of creative accounting," I continued, ignoring Sarah's immediate question for a moment, keeping my focus on Mark, watching him crumble. "Do you recall Mr. Robert Maxwell, Mark? The small business owner from Charlotte? The one whose life savings you siphoned through a shell corporation, using his accounts to launder funds for your less reputable associates." Mark's bravado completely evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes flicking wildly around the room. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was trapped. "And for you, Sarah," I said, finally turning my gaze to my daughter, my voice softening, filled with a deep, aching regret. "I am so sorry for the pain this will cause you. But your Mark is not just a charming fiancé. He is a serial deceiver, a calculating opportunist, and a man deeply involved in financial fraud and potentially dangerous criminal activities. He married Eleanor for her assets, just as he was preparing to do with you. He's been siphoning funds, taking advantage of my generosity, and trying to frame me to cover his tracks." I then pulled out my phone and played a short recording, a clear, distorted voice threatening me, mentioning Sarah's name, proof of his coercion and his attempts to silence me. "This is just a small sample of the threats I've endured to bring you the truth, darling. He threatened your safety, Sarah, not just your happiness." Sarah's face crumpled. She looked from my resolute expression to Mark's terrified, exposed visage. The denial, the love, the carefully constructed fantasy of her future, all shattered in that single, agonizing moment. Her eyes welled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of anger at me. They were tears of profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. "No," she whispered, a broken sound. "No, Mark. Is this true?" Mark finally found his voice, a desperate, pathetic croak. "Sarah, no. She's lying. She's always hated me. She's trying to ruin my life." He lunged towards me, his hand reaching out, but Arthur, who had been waiting just outside the door, stepped in, his presence a quiet, formidable deterrent. "Mr. Hayes Collins," Arthur said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I'd advise you to step back. The evidence Evelyn has presented is substantial, and the FBI has been notified. They're on their way." Mark froze, his eyes wide with stark terror. The mention of the FBI, the sheer finality of it, broke him. He looked at Sarah, a flicker of something resembling remorse, or perhaps just self-pity, in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted for the door, pushing past Arthur, disappearing into the night. He was running, not from me, but from the crushing weight of his exposed lies. Sarah sat utterly still, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. The room fell silent, save for her soft, heartbroken sobs. I knelt beside her, my hand gently resting on her trembling back. It was done. The truth was out. The storm had broken. And now the long, painful process of rebuilding would begin. The days that followed were a raw, open wound. Mark's frantic escape lasted only a few hours. The FBI, armed with Arthur's detailed report and my accumulated evidence, tracked him down at the airport, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. The news flashed across local headlines: prominent businessman arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The picture they ran was of a disheveled, defeated Mark, a stark contrast to the polished image he had so carefully cultivated. His reputation, his carefully constructed life, was utterly destroyed. Justice of a sort had been served. But for Sarah, it was not justice, it was devastation. She moved back into my quiet house, not to rebuild, but to grieve. The vibrant colors of her apartment, her abstract art, seemed a world away from the muted tones of my home, a reflection of the vibrant life that had been ripped from her. Her world, built on a foundation of Mark's charm and her own innocent dreams, had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She spent hours in her old room, the curtains drawn, emerging only for tea or a quiet meal. She barely spoke, her silence a heavy cloak of grief and anger. The anger, I knew, was directed as much at me as it was at Mark. She blamed me for the destruction, for the painful truth. "You knew, Mother," she whispered one evening, her voice hoarse, her eyes red-rimmed. "You knew all along, and you didn't tell me. You let me fall in love with him. You let me plan this wedding." "I tried to warn you, darling," I replied, my voice thick with my own pain. "I saw the signs, the small deceptions. But you wouldn't listen. You defended him." "Because I loved him," she cried, her voice cracking. "I believed in him. And you ripped it all away." The accusation hung in the air, a bitter truth. I had ripped away her illusions, her future, her trust. My heart ached with a pain far deeper than any Mark had inflicted on me. I wanted to gather her in my arms, to tell her it was for her own good, but I knew words were useless. She had to navigate this grief on her own terms, to experience the full, raw agony of betrayal. My role now was simply to be present, a silent, unwavering anchor in her storm. I cooked her favorite meals, left fresh flowers on her nightstand, and sat with her in silence on the screened porch, watching the hydrangeas. I answered the barrage of legal questions from Mark's lawyers, provided statements to the authorities, and calmly dealt with the inevitable gossip and prying questions from our small community. "Such a terrible business, Evelyn," they'd say, their eyes still searching for confirmation of the old rumors. I met their gazes with quiet dignity, refusing to engage in their petty dramas. My focus was solely on Sarah. Slowly, painstakingly, like the first fragile shoots of spring pushing through frozen earth, Sarah began to heal. She started to read again, at first only light novels, then more substantial books. She started taking long walks in the botanical gardens, revisiting the place where her broken dream had begun. I saw her one afternoon, sitting on a bench, sketching in a small notebook, her artistic spirit tentatively reawakening. One evening, she came to me, her eyes still shadowed but clearer. "Mother," she said, her voice softer, "I found the receipt for the other ring. The more expensive one." He was going to sell my ring, wasn't he? Or replace it with a cheap one after the wedding, claiming he lost it. Her voice was filled with a dawning horror, a slow, painful realization of the depth of Mark's deceit. Perhaps, darling, I said, keeping my voice neutral, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. He was a very resourceful man when it came to his own financial gain. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, for the first time since the wedding. You saved me, didn't you? Her voice was barely a whisper, laden with a mixture of shame and gratitude. You saw him, truly saw him, and you protected me, even when I hated you for it. A tear slipped down my cheek, a rare public display of emotion. I simply nodded. There were no words needed. In that moment, the chasm between us began to bridge. It wasn't a complete healing, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the scars too deep. But it was a beginning. A fragile, tentative step towards understanding. She was seeing me not as the villain who destroyed her happiness, but as the mother who had braved a dangerous storm to save her. My long, internal struggle, my agonizing moral choices, had finally, blessedly, yielded the result I had prayed for. She was hurt, but she was free. And that, I realized, was worth every single shred of pain. My arc was not about a happy ending, but a wise acceptance of a new reality, a quiet, resolute peace found in the crucible of truth. Time, like a river, flows relentlessly forward, smoothing over sharp edges, carving new paths. Months turned into a year, then two, since the chaos of the wedding and the stark revelation of Mark's true nature. The scars remained, faint but visible, on Sarah's heart, but the wounds had healed. She no longer spoke of Mark, the mention of his name replaced by a quiet, determined focus on her own future. She had found a new apartment, a loft space downtown with enormous windows and an abundance of natural light, perfect for her artistic endeavors. She threw herself into her work, channeling her raw emotions into a new series of paintings that were darker, more profound, yet ultimately hopeful. Her art, once bright and purely optimistic, now held a richer, more complex depth, a testament to her journey through betrayal and resilience. She started her own small business, designing bespoke invitations and branding for local artists, finding a quiet strength in her independence. She dated, casually at first, then more thoughtfully, but always with a newfound discernment, a quiet wisdom in her eyes that had replaced her earlier naivety. She had learned, the hard way, to look beyond the surface, to trust her own instincts. Our relationship, once strained by unspoken truths and painful accusations, had blossomed into something deeper, more honest than I could have ever imagined. The forced politeness, the subtle dances around difficult subjects, were gone. We talked, truly talked, for hours on my screened porch, sharing not just pleasantries, but vulnerabilities. Sarah would confide in me about her fears, her hopes, her struggles, and I, in turn, found myself sharing glimpses of my own past, the quiet battles I had fought, the lessons learned from loss and deception. She saw me not just as her mother, but as a strong, complex woman who had always fought for her, even when it meant breaking her heart to save it. You know, Mother, she said one crisp autumn afternoon, as we sat sipping tea amidst the riot of color in my garden, sometimes I still get angry. At him, for lying. At myself, for being so blind. But mostly I'm just grateful. Grateful that you had the courage to do what I couldn't. You saw the truth when I was too scared to look. She reached across the small table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Thank you. For everything. A profound sense of peace settled over me, a quiet, deep contentment that had eluded me for so long. My life, once a meticulously constructed mask of routine and control, was now simply life. The need to guard, to shield, to plan every eventuality had softened. I still tended my garden, still made my Earl Grey tea at dawn, but the underlying tension had eased. The quiet life was no longer a fortress, it was a home. I had learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding conflict, but facing it head-on, even when it meant risking everything you held dear. It wasn't about never falling, but about rising again, with wisdom gleaned from the dust. Justice, I discovered, wasn't always a dramatic courtroom verdict. Sometimes it was the quiet dismantling of a lie, the slow, painful process of truth setting someone free. And love, true love, was never easy. It demanded sacrifice, courage, and the willingness to inflict temporary pain for lasting protection. I looked out at my garden, a symphony of late-season blooms, the deep purples of aster, the fiery reds of Japanese maples, the last brave roses clinging to life. Each flower, each leaf, was a testament to resilience, to the cyclical beauty of decay and renewal. My past, with its shadows and pains, was no longer a burden, but a part of the rich tapestry of my being, a source of quiet strength. I had saved my daughter, and in doing so, I had finally saved a part of myself. The battle was over. The silence was no longer a mask, but a deeply earned peace.